I wasn't able to kind of make decisions and stand by them. I had a really deep sense of sort of imposter syndrome. My confidence sort of plummeted. I was kind of questioning myself, things that I was doing.
Because the moment I was like, no, I'm not going on payroll, I need to invoice. They were like, all right, let's add. I had my child at 16. So I was more like, no, I can't do that. They're like, Charles, why is everything wrong with you? You're holding a baby and holding an infant.
And I spent the money on the offices and we were getting it all kitted out and we had a launch and everything, and literally within 4 weeks the turnover plummeted, and I kept thinking next month it'll be better, and started ploughing in money to keep the business going, to keep the staff on.
I didn't really have that much money. I had my savings, but I don't come from a family privilege. I come from a working class family. So I had all of these kind of barriers that at the time I didn't realise were barriers. I just got on with it and just moved. I moved without thinking. I had an idea.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of She's the Boss Female Entrepreneur Stories, where I'm joined by phenomenal women from the world of entrepreneurship. Those who share their challenges, their successes, their joys, and sometimes their failures, all with the aim of inspiring, motivating, uplifting, and empowering you on your entrepreneurial journey. If you haven't already done so, please make sure that you subscribe or click that follow button so that you never miss out when I release a new interview. And if you're not already following on social media, give us a follow. On Instagram, I'm at She's the Boss UK, on Twitter at She's the Boss INTL, and on Facebook, Daniela Genus, She's the Boss. And make sure that you connect. Today, I'm joined by Angelica Malin, who is an award-winning young entrepreneur and founder of About Time magazine. Angelica, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I've just turned 30, so do I still count as a young entrepreneur? Like, where's the cutoff point?
I would say that you do.
Yeah, I'll dine out for like another year on that.
I think you got, well, I still say that I'm young-ish and I've got quite a few years on you, so I'm just going to say that we'll keep it forever. Until you feel old.
Okay, fine.
So tell me about your journey. What was your kind of first foray into the world of entrepreneurship?
Sure. So I started a magazine pretty much straight out of university. So I've never had a 9-to-5. I've never worked for someone else, which I think is a blessing in some ways, because I never had that fear of leaving the security of a paid salaried job for working for myself. I've just always worked for myself. So I've never had the other side of that fear. But also meant I went into it pretty young without any experience or training or qualifications. But I left Bristol. I did English at university. I graduated into a not great job market, and there wasn't really anything going in journalism. And I thought, well, I'll just start my own thing. And I kind of started a magazine almost as a portfolio for myself, without much of a business plan or kind of income revenue strategy. But I went from there, and yeah, I've been doing it now since March 2014, so quite a while, and it's taken a kind of life and shape of its own. But it's been an interesting journey, and not one without its own setbacks.
So magazines, as I know, because I've been involved in a couple over the years, are very difficult to put together. It takes a lot of hard work and effort. How easy was it for you when you started, and who did you have kind of to support you?
So I have an online site, so I think that definitely makes it easier. I never went down the print route. Even all those years ago when I left university, print was already on the wane. So I went online only, which I think has always been good. There is, I think the biggest challenge with anything that's an editorial output is having the consistency to keep producing and keep putting stuff out there. And that's definitely the challenge. I mean, I think anyone can create a great magazine for like a day, but the skill is really to keep it going and to continue to come up with new ideas, and also to monetize it as well. The creative industries are particularly hard to make money out of, and you might have a beautiful website that has amazing content, but it still won't necessarily generate income. So for me, it's been like the challenge of straddling both being a creative person and also having to be commercially minded.
How have you managed that? Did you have mentors? Have you had support?
No, I mean, I'd like to say I had support, but I think like lots of people who are doing things that there isn't a set path for them, it can be quite hard to find people on your journey that have done similar things. So I never found someone that had a kind of exact replica for the kind of career I was pursuing. I have had people along the way that have helped, but never like one mentor. So there's a couple of ways that we did it. Firstly was taking the digital into physical. So doing ticketed events was a great source of income and something that really helped us strengthen a bond with the community that we created. So we do kind of female empowerment festivals, we do panel talks, workshops, everything. Of course, COVID has changed all of that, but that was one of our income kind of revenue strategies before. And then we also just do the classic stuff like sponsored editorials and working with brands.
So the adverts part, that's typically the challenging piece. Do you remember kind of the approach, how you approached that in the early stages and some of the no's that you had to overcome?
Yeah, it's not something I naturally particularly enjoy, to be honest. I've never been much of a brand person. So actually that was one of the first things I did to bring into the business was someone who was really good and specialized in brand partnerships, because it is a skill in itself. I find the kind of the deliverable side of it and the negotiation side of it kind of difficult. And I think, you know, being a good business owner is being able to identify your weaknesses and not always trying to build those skills, but also take on people who have those skills and it comes more naturally to them. But I think what's challenging in my industry is the kind of sweet spot between selling your services and selling out. So you want to work with brands, but you also don't want to lose your audience by kind of seeming like you're selling out and promoting things too often. So you can't do too much of sponsored content, which is difficult. It means that you're kind of capped in what you can do. So I think we're all navigating in digital media ways to monetize. A paywall is something that lots of brands do now, like lots of media outlets. I mean, so you have it might be $1.99 a month, or it might be £80 for the year, and you get unlimited access to their content, or some of their content is premium, and you can only get the premium content if you sign up and pay. So that's a model that we've looked at as well. So there are definitely ways to do it, but it's being quite innovative in your approach. And if you're a platform that sells products, then you can make good money on affiliates. So it depends on the nature of the content.
And kind of let's go back to the early stages. What would you say were some of the kind of key high points versus some of the key lower points?
I think it's all been challenging, if I'm honest. I don't think things get any easier the longer you are in business. I think you get more resilient and you learn how to deal with things better. And I also feel like I've done this 10 years now. Pretty much every scenario that could have happened, I think, has happened, whether it's kind of getting sued, whether it's having to fire someone, whether it's having those moments where you're like, I think we're not going to make it, like, you know, you're scraping in the bank. A pandemic, like, tick that off the list. So I now feel I feel calmer about things, because I feel like I've been through most of it once and none of it feels as scary. I would say that in terms of general low points, I think people are always the hardest things to manage in a business. And for me, letting people go has always been things that I look back on in my journey and have found very personally difficult. I'm not someone who can detach their emotions from their work. And I think I found it quite personally challenging when I've had to reshape team or let people go or just not have the money to do it, which is always quite hard. I think high points personally would probably be some of our events where you see that community in action. I think that always feels amazing, and to be able to put a face to your readers is great. Especially, you know, the numbers you get a bit numb to numbers after a while. Like, we know that around 100,000 people read the site every month, but I don't meet 100,000 people. I meet 10 if I'm lucky that know it. And so something about seeing your audience in person just makes the whole thing feel a lot more real. I think it's the same with people that have big Instagram followings. When they put on actual events or they do a live where they get to chat to people, they suddenly realize that community is actually some humans behind it. So all my high points have been about interaction. But I wrote a book that came out in January, and I think that was a high point, despite the fact it came out when bookshops were shut. So that has been kind of weird. But that was a high point because it was something I'd wanted to do for a while.
Congratulations. I'm going to come to that a little bit later. So when we're thinking of you spoke obviously about letting people go, when one of the challenges, and you even said it yourself, that a lot of my clients face is finding the right team, getting the right team on board. When did you take on your first team member, and what kind of process did you follow? I assume it wasn't a formal process, but if you look back, what have you learned, I suppose, from that first
Yeah,
hire?
it was quite an informal process, and I think I learned quite a lot from how informal it was, and that's perhaps where I went slightly wrong. My first hire was someone that joined as an intern and then came on full time, but I didn't have the right contracts in place, and I think the working relationship was too casual. And the problem is, I think it can be dangerous for both sides, in that if the boundaries aren't clear, one party might feel like they're being not exploited, but like worked too hard, for example. The other party might think they're not getting enough out of someone. And I think what I've learned now is making it very clear what's expected of someone, even down to, like, you know, the working hours, whether they're going to be answerable on email post 6 o'clock, all those things, like the nuts and bolts of it. Because so much, it's like a relationship, a romantic relationship, so much can get lost in miscommunication and not talking about things. So that was my first hire. I think it depends like what your business goals are, so it's hard to say really, but I think the thing that's taking up the most of your time that could free you up to be able to be the manager and the kind of the overview person of your business who can really drive it forwards and give you space to work on the business, not in it, is always a good place to start. So for me, it was a waste of my time and capabilities a little bit to be constantly writing content, because there are so many great content writers, but I wanted to be the one that was steering the ship. So it made sense for me to hire a writer so that I could dedicate more time to trying to build a business. So that's always good. And then I think if you're, you know, someone that struggles with numbers and accountancy and everything, like having a finance person early days, even if it's 1 day a week part-time, that's going to be invaluable.
Yeah. Nobody, it's very rare that I speak to somebody who had a formal kind of recruitment and onboarding process, and it's so important, but it is one of those things that you don't know until you've already made the mistakes. And yeah, definitely can second what you're saying in regards to using your time effectively. So if you are talented in a specific area and you started the business in that specific area, it doesn't mean that you have to be the sole person doing it. But equally, if you started a business and there's areas that you're not good at, then you don't have to do that either. So outsourcing, I think, is really it can be really useful. Working with freelancers, if you can't afford to bring somebody on kind of on a more full-time or a part-time basis within the business.
For sure. Yeah, freelancers can be great, and you can have a strong working relationship with a freelancer as someone who's on staff. They can still give of themselves. I think what's changed in the last few years is we used to think freelancers were people that were like in between work before they were getting a full-time job, and like so many people now are fully freelance and self-employed, and that's the way they operate, and they treat their clients with utmost respect, and you don't have to have that fear that they're suddenly going to not work for you anymore.
Yeah. And I also always advocate for systems and processes. So making sure that you've got your systems and processes clearly defined, or define them as you're going along, but make sure that you're tracking what you're doing, so that if you are bringing somebody into the organization, you don't have to spend lots of time training them from scratch, because you've got things documented that you can hand over. That makes that whole onboarding process much simpler, much more efficient, and much quicker, less stressful. Okay. So, and also, sorry, on that point, a great book, I don't know if you've ever read it, E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber, and he talks quite a lot about that, and I always rave about the book because I think it's great. When you you spoke before about times where you felt that maybe the business wasn't going to continue, and I'm sure that there's so many small business owners that have been in that exact position. Obviously, you are still in business, so it's you kind of worked it out. But during that point, have you ever, or I don't know if it's happened more than once, but during those points, have you ever considered going and getting a job? Because I know you're in a position quite similar to me. So I started my business straight out of uni, and I've never really had a proper full-time permanent job. And therefore, I feel like people like us think kind of differently, because it's not really an option to go and get a job in the same way that somebody that's left a job may think. So have you ever been on the edge of thinking maybe I should just go and get a job?
Not really. Not strong enough. I think, if I'm honest, I think the last year has been very challenging, and I think that's largely just from working from home, that I felt like I wanted more people around me, and was like, maybe if I get a job, then I've got more people around me without having to like hire more people. And that, I think this year in terms of loneliness has been quite hard. So that's probably the only time that I've had like genuine wobbles. But my thoughts are, I think on the whole, you can have a lot more of an impact as an individual if you're self-employed, if you're starting something, because you're contributing to the world, you're creating a business, you're putting it out there, you're hiring people, you're giving them a livelihood. And I think that's such an impactful thing to be able to do. And there's nothing wrong with being an employee, but I think that my personal sort of sense of legacy like overrides that I think I can have more impact in the world by being a boss and by being self-employed. And not all, sometimes I don't really want to be, but I don't really feel like I have much choice. Like, this is the way of working that I think is right for me. And it comes with its own challenges, like social challenges as well as business ones. I think it can be quite isolating to be self-employed, because the things that you worry about and struggle with, perhaps the things that your friends or your partner doesn't really get, because they're in a job where they get a salary at the end of the month no matter what. And there is a weight and an expectation on your shoulders, especially if you have a team, and that can be quite a lot to deal with mentally. And I don't think it's spoken about as much. I think we glamorize self-employment and hustle culture and businesses, but the mental health side of it is a lot, and it's being really mindful that sometimes it can feel quite isolating and quite high pressure.
Yeah, I agree. It's not spoken about enough. And I have read some statistics that I cannot remember off the top of my head that say that generally most entrepreneurs deal with some level of mental health issue on their kind of throughout their career. And it makes sense. There's so much, as you said, so much pressure. When things go wrong, it is kind of all on your head for the most part, and that is quite stressful. And I suppose, speaking of that, then, do you have kind of a wellness, like, I don't want to say plan, but
routine,
that's the word.
So I don't have a set one, but what I would say is what I've developed over the last few years is a really, really keen sense of self-awareness. So I can feel myself burn out before I burn out now, and I know to give myself a rest before I have to. Whereas years ago, I would sort of get to the point where I was like, okay, I have to take a day off, or I have to have a day in bed, and I'm feeling awful. And I don't get to that point anymore. I can see warning signs a bit better. And I think that's what all founders need to have, of like, oh, I'm starting to feel quite cranky, or like, I haven't had any good ideas recently. Why is that? One of the things that I think is I've learned is that you don't need to earn rest. I used to always think if I was productive, then I was allowed to chill. If I had a busy day, then I could relax. And actually, like, rest is just something you're allowed. You're allowed it no matter what. And if you need to, I took most of today off because I just felt this morning I woke up and I was like, I don't have anything that's incredibly urgent, and I'm just not feeling my best self. And I think that's okay. And we should allow ourselves just more self-compassion and self-kindness to give that space. It's very dependent on your situation. If you have a full-time team and you have to show up to Zoom meetings, it's different. But for me, part of the way I have designed my career is so that I can allow that space and freedom and flexibility to I just think being master of your own time is like the best thing ever, and allowing you to be present in the parts of your life that you want to be. So it's one of the best things about being self-employed, and yet one of the least used. Yeah,
I agree. I'm a huge advocate for rest. And there's so many women that I've spoken to on this journey that have suffered from serious burnout because they don't prioritize rest and self-care. And I recognize also that kind of self-care and well-being seems to be this buzz phrase that so many people don't necessarily take seriously, because they just look at the fluffiness, or take a bath, light some candles, and don't take it as seriously as we should take it. Because actually, if you put your body and your mind under extreme pressure and stress for an extended period of time, it can have negative long-term implications. And what is the benefit of having a thriving business if you're not able to be well and to benefit from it?
Totally. And rest looks different for everyone else. Like self-care isn't just bubble baths. It is about understanding what actually makes you feel relaxed. It might be cooking a nice meal. It might be going for a walk. Mine is just like watching Sex and the City and sitting with the dog on my lap. And it's just understanding what kind of works for you.
Yeah, I love to read in bed. I love being in bed generally. It's one of
I also love being in bed. Like sometimes I just get into bed and I'm like, I'm so happy that I'm here.
Me too. My mum always laughs because she'll video call me. She'll be like, you're in the bed again. I'm like, where else do I need to be? Yeah, great.
That's so good.
So talk to me about the book. What was the kind of impetus for doing it? What was the process, and what has been, I suppose, the highlight of being able to be an author?
Sure. So the process was quite straightforward. I think I was lucky in that respect. My publisher actually approached me and they were looking for a book around female entrepreneurship. And I'd been doing events in this space for a couple of years, and they got in touch. So it was quite an easy process of getting the kind of book signed. Writing it, however, was different. I mean, I wrote it in the first lockdown. So it was a weird time to be writing your first book, as there's all this kind of sadness and chaos and uncertainty all around you, and then you have this one project. But I think it was a bit of a saving grace for me because it was this one thing that I could focus on, which was great. And I interviewed around 50 women for the book who have started their own businesses, and it's like a handbook for if you want to start a business. It's got all the kind of tools and insights that you need. And I learned so much from speaking to other women who are incredibly successful and kind of had it all, about the challenges they faced and the struggles that they go through daily. And it really made me realize that at no matter what stage of your career, there are things that everyone will struggle with. So it looks at things like imposter syndrome, the challenges of raising investment, how to manage a team, lots of the things that we've talked about, and just has advice and insights into how to manage all that stuff. So it's been good. I mean, I have felt a bit sad about not being able to go into a bookshop and purchase it, but hopefully next few weeks I'll be able to do that. But I think for anyone that's thinking of writing a book, I would say go for it, because you learn so much about yourself in the process of doing it as well.
I love that. Legacy. So where do you hope to take the business? Are there any other projects that you want to kind of pursue? What's the long-term kind of goal for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd like to write a few more books. I have a PR book in mind. Having worked in journalism for like 10 years, I've been on the receiving end of so many pitches and story ideas. And I'd love to write a book that tells people like what journalists actually want and how to pitch a really good story and get coverage. So that's my plan, hopefully in the next year or so, to write a PR book. In terms of the business, I think for me, it's about having a really flexible mindset. If anything, I think the last year has showed us that we really don't know what's around the corner. And I've never been tied to one business model, to one approach, to one team. I've always had the vision of allowing things to happen and to be flexible and open. So I could see us going into a paid for model in the next year or so. I could hopefully see us going back to physical events as well. I think after this period of disconnection, people are craving human connection more than anything else. So I'd love when it's safe for us to be putting on events again in London. But I think take it day by day. Like, we can stress ourselves out too much by having 5-year plans and having goals. And especially at the moment, I think it's about being kind and gentle to yourself, and this is not the time to be putting your foot on the gas, actually. I think for the most part, it's just about generating self-awareness and trying to get through what's been a very difficult year. And if you just managed to like do a bit of work in the last year, I think you've done all right.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think being kind to ourselves is definitely something that I've been shouting about over this last 12 months. And you mentioned earlier about this kind of hustle culture. And I remember seeing a post I've seen it a few times, a post on Instagram that said something about, if you haven't leveled up during the lockdown, like, what have you been doing with your life, or something like that. And then somebody else had written over it and saying we've been surviving. And I just thought that it's so true. We can sometimes get quite bogged down in, we have to do this and hustle until we drop. But yeah, like, looking after yourself is quite key also.
Definitely.
3 pieces of advice. So you've kind of mentioned advice throughout, but 3 pieces of advice you'd give to a woman who's sitting at home listening and wants to start a business or is in the early stages of running her business.
Sure. So my first bit of advice would be around clarity. I just think that's probably the most important thing. Whilst I think it's important to be flexible in your mindset, like I've mentioned, I think clarity over just where you want it to go in, say, the next 6 months is so important, especially if you're like me and you're a multi-hyphenate that works across different projects. It can be really challenging, like day to day, to have the focus and clarity on what it is you actually need to be doing to move your career and business forwards. So I'd always say, like, setting out a 6-month plan as well as like a month-by-month plan as well. So I have it just stuck on my kitchen door, and it has like the goals for every month of the next 6 months and what I'm focusing on for that month, and trying to be realistic as well with what you can actually get done in 4 weeks, for example. But I'm such a planner, and it's kind of like planning the night before, the day ahead, and all that kind of stuff. So give yourself clarity. I think that's very important. My second bit of advice would be around support networks. So if you can find people who are doing something similar or you have shared experiences with, that's so valuable, because like I said, it can be very isolating, and my female friends who are business owners, I think, get it on a kind of deeper level. So if you don't have those people in your life, and you do find that you're boring all your friends by talking about your business endlessly, then like go out and find that network, go to Eventbrite and look at events in your industry, join a something like the Albright or a members club. So create a support network. And I think the third one actually would probably be around people pleasing, because I think that's something I have realized can really infiltrate your business life as well as your personal life, is wanting to please people and thereby kind of lessening your own voice. And if you're a founder and you have a vision for a business, like, that voice is really important. And whilst it's great to have other people's opinions and whatever, I think having a sense of self and ownership of like where you want a project to go is so important. So just something to be wary of is trying to please other people too much, whether it's your team or your investors, just not letting other people crowd out the thought processes too much. And I think another part of that is creating space where you can hear yourself. So if it's going for a walk without your phone, or it's having a bath and putting your phone in another room, just things you can do to actually reconnect with yourself is really important, because sometimes it can get a little bit confusing, like if you are people pleasing and you don't even realize that it's showing up for you. So trying to find ways to reconnect with your own inner voice.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. She's the Boss recommends a book, film, podcast, or all three that has had a positive impact on your entrepreneurial journey.
Oh, okay. I mean, I could probably do all three. So the book I'd recommend, I've got so many. I mean, Untamed by Glennon Doyle is a great book around, it's more about personal life than business, but it is about the mantra of it being, we can do hard things. And I think it's something I always come back to, is whenever things feel challenging in my business, I'm like, we can do hard things. So I think that's really important. I think spirituality has a big role to play in business, to be honest. I think being able to connect with your inner self and your intuition is very important. So I've actually found spirituality books to be more useful for my business than traditional business books. So things like The Universe Has Your Back by Gabby Bernstein, those kind of books that help you connect with your inner voice, I've found to be very useful. And podcast wise, How I Built This on NPR is one of my favorites. I think storytelling is so useful and important for businesses, and if you can connect with other people's stories, it can really help inspire you. So I love that podcast, just for hearing the other side of businesses and what struggles they've gone through. And also How to Fail by Elizabeth Day, I think is really great for like flipping the script on failure and looking at not just business owners but celebrities and all sorts about what they've learned from their failures and how we can all learn through failures, because failure is something that you have to confront as a business owner, that not everything's going to work out, and how can you build a better relationship with failure, that you don't let it like crush you but actually can come back stronger from it.
Fabulous. Thank you. If people want to connect with you, please share all your platforms or the social media.
Sure. So I'm at Jelly Malin on all platforms, and I also offer one-on-one consultancy on PR. So you can get in touch with me on angelicamalin.com, and you can book in for consultancy as well.
And the magazine?
Magazine's called About Time. So abouttimemagazine.co.uk, and my book's called She Made It.
Fabulous. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you for
sharing
having
with us
me.
today. And if there's anything that Angelica has said that resonates with you, please make sure that you leave a comment. Share with those in your network who you feel need to hear this conversation. And as usual, click that subscribe and follow button and make sure that you're following on social media. I'll be back next week with another She's the Boss female entrepreneur story, Sunday at 8 p.m. Thank you for watching.